Hi, my name's Rob Jolliffe, and this is a Sabre Limited Expert Series. We're going to talk about why ERP projects fail, or why your ERP project failed. And this is part one of a two-part series. So this is part one of a two-part series on figuring out why your ERP project failed. This is a really common question. I'm asked it all the time. Businesses don't want to make the same mistakes they made before. And they ask me basically, what could have gone wrong? So let's dig into this and look at it a little bit more. I'm Rob Jolliffe, by the way. I'm president of Sabre Limited, and I'm an expert in Microsoft Dynamics Business Central, particularly for manufacturing. And this is part one of a two-part series, in which case in this particular instance, we're going to deal with the people problems that I think are the most common cause of an ERP problem or implementation failure. A couple of assumptions I'm going to make. This is a manufacturing type project. My expertise is with manufacturing, so I'm going to be very focused on that. I think it's relevant to other types of ERP projects as well. This is not a huge multi-million-dollar ERP project like an SAP or Oracle ERP project. This is a what I call mid-market ERP, which would be perhaps up to a few $100,000, or at least the original quote was a few $100,000. I've seen some that have gone way out of control, but a typical ERP project for us is under 100,000. So this should not be a huge project. Okay, so the first possible cause from a people point of view is your team. So let's dig into some of the reasons why it could have been your team that was causing the problems. And here are some of the signs of a bad team as I see it. And obviously I'm from the vendor side, so I'm going to give you my point of view as it appears to me. You'll have to determine if this makes sense to you. Okay. If your team seems to always be blaming the consultants, but never really taking responsibility for their own part and never really giving you good explanations for why issues are happening and problems, it's a lot of blame game. I would be very concerned about that. I find that teams that tend to do that, there's a lot of finger pointing in the team, even amongst their own team members, tend to be dysfunctional, and that can cause a big problem with an ERP project. If the team members are making a lot of excuses for their failures, for missing their deadlines, and they're picking on every mistake that other people are making, especially the implementation consultants, that's a red flag as well, because it should be teamwork, as I mentioned earlier, and everybody should be taking responsibility for their own part. One of the things that I'll just make a comment about is we've seen situations where there's a task that needs to be done before go live, but it only needs to be done before go live, and go live might be 4 months away. Most ERP projects take about 6 to 8 months to complete. So you're in month 2 or 3, and you got 3 or 4 more months to go. But the customer's team is missing deadlines constantly, and so there's some tool or customization that they need or want for go live, and the ERP company is delaying it because the customer's team isn't getting their work done. Why would the ERP team rush something? Particularly since sometimes people change their mind about stuff after they start using it and they really get into the system. And when your team is really picking on those things, like we can't move forward because they didn't finish this report or they haven't modified this thing that we need, it says to me that they're really just trying to make excuses to avoid having to work. Now, if you assign very junior staff to an ERP project, that is a really bad sign. And that is a very common cause of a failed ERP project. The people who are working on the ERP project need to really know your business, particularly in the beginning. As you get further and further along, more junior staff can get involved. But in the beginning, you're making a lot of decisions about what you should be doing or shouldn't be doing with ERP. And if you have junior people making those decisions, they almost always make mistakes. If your team expected the consultants to do all the work, like if they just had this expectation that, well, we don't have to do anything. Why do we have to do anything in this project? We're buying the product. They're going to do everything for us. That is really not going to work, because if your team doesn't take ownership and they're not involved in the project, then once you try and turn the system on, they have no idea how to use it. These are very complex software packages. They have literally thousands of different screens that we need to train customers to use sometimes. And if they're just absent from the training and they're not paying attention, they're always busy, they won't be able to use it. I didn't say, by the way, at any point that your team didn't understand ERP. And there's a reason why I bring this up and I highlight it, because understanding the ERP is the consultant's job. It's not your team's job. So one thing that I get a lot of clients coming to me and saying is that, oh, they've had all these problems but they didn't understand ERP. So I'm going to hire somebody who understands ERP. That is not a good idea. There's a whole variety of reasons for that. The most important one is that that new team member who's supposed to be an expert in ERP are going to have to prove themselves. And quite often they'll prove themselves by arguing with the consultants and claiming that they know better. And if they refuse to listen to the consultants, that can cause huge problems. Because one thing I would tell you is that the typical outsider who's brought into an ERP project by a customer has not done the same type of ERP project for the same type of business. And we believe in our internal staffing, we consider a consultant to be senior only after they've done about 5,000 hours of ERP projects, which is about 2.5 years of solid ERP work. And we only do manufacturing. That means 2.5 years of manufacturing ERP projects. We find a lot of clients hire somebody from outside. They have experience with SAP, but they were working in a distribution or they were working in a professional services industry. And that is not an applicable skill set, and it does not help with the project. So that is one thing we want to warn you about, because that is a common problem, and it comes from that ERP consultant, internal consultant who doesn't have the right expertise, arguing and trying to drive the project plan rather than letting the consultants you're working with actually make the decisions or lead you down the right path. Now, all of that being said, the consultants could have sucked. And it could have been their fault that the project didn't go well. So how do we tell if the consultants were the problem? Signs of a bad consultant team. Now, by the way, when I say consultants, I'm usually talking about the team that you bought the ERP from, not some third-party group that you might have brought in. And that happens from time to time, where you buy the ERP from one company, but for some reason you've hired another one to implement it. Typically, that's not done. So I'm assuming that the company you bought the ERP from is the company that supplied the consultants who were training you. You need to have consultants that understand your industry. If the consultants that you hired do not have experience with your industry, then that's a problem, but not your specific business. So if you're a job shop manufacturer that welds and assembled stairwells, and you're looking for consultants that have experience in stairwell manufacturing, there probably aren't that many competitors who do stairwell manufacturing, and the likelihood of the consultants actually having experience in that space means that they worked for your competitors, and they did it recently because there probably aren't enough of them that those consultants could gain that expertise. Don't look for that. That is not valuable to you. It's not really going to help. But if they have never worked in job shop manufacturing before, and they've only ever worked in pharmaceutical, or they've worked in professional services and engineering firms, that's the problem that you're looking out for. If the consultants seem to be hiding things from you or preventing you from doing certain things, like you're asking them, can we do that? And it seems like they won't offload that to you because you feel like they want to bill more. That's a bit of a tell that there might have been a problem with the consulting firm. We like to show customers how to do things and offload things to the customers to do them. I think that's very important because it implies that they're trying to make sure that you're fully trained. Now, there are things that are just complicated, and you only need to do them once during your project. You'll never do them again. You'll never redo the setup of the financial system, for instance, or if you ever do, it'll be years and years in the future. Those do make sense. But if it's modifying a report layout or uploading data into the system, it's either a sign that the system's very hard to use, or it's a sign that the consultant doesn't want to give up that revenue. If you let your team push the consultants around, which is sort of similar to not listening to the consultants, except it's a case where the consultants themselves are just not firm. They're very wishy-washy. They let your team walk all over them. That is a bad sign. That can lead to a real problem with a project. If the consultants don't help you manage the project and manage your team. They're not giving you any advice on how to make sure your team works with it. That can be a problem. Now, be cautious. Sometimes you just don't have a staff member who's good at managing a project, any project. And if that's the case, then that's not necessarily their fault. You do have to have somebody who knows how to manage a project. So we sometimes recommend that you get an external project manager. But the risk is that a project manager sometimes will also apply too much of their own controls and their own processes. So a project coordinator, a really good executive assistant who knows how to run projects is just as useful as a full-fledged project manager in these cases. If the consulting firm isn't warning you on of risks and problems that might be occurring and then documenting those, they're just letting you make mistakes, that can be a real problem. We've always tried to inform our clients when there's something that you shouldn't be doing and put it in writing if we have a concern and ask you to sign it. And yes, that seems like a cover your behind CYA type activity, but it indicates that the consultants are trying to be honest with you in a professional way, as opposed to being just argumentative. So it can be a fine line as a consultant helping a customer to sort of straddle that line between being argumentative and being firm about whether or not we believe in something. So just be aware of that. The next type of, or the next individual or group involved in the project, the next person could be you. Could you have been the problem with the project? And how to tell if it was your fault. So, 1, did you rush the team and not listen when they said they needed time? A very common problem with an ERP implementation that's gone wrong is an arbitrary go live date was set by the owner or the senior management, and the team was told, I don't care if you're ready, you're going to go live. And I want you to think about that for a moment, because if somebody within your organization told the team, if I don't care if you're ready, they essentially were saying, I don't care if my business collapses under the weight of a terrible ERP implementation, you're going to go live because I've set an arbitrary deadline. Do not do that. It is not effective. It does not push people to be more successful. Be cautious about whether you played favorites between the consultants and your own in-house team. Now, I understand that you have to have coffee with these people in the morning, and the consultants are just vendors that you've hired to do the job. But you really need to treat the consultants and your team as being a single consolidated group, like all stakeholders in the success of the project. And if you start to play favorites, if you start always taking your team's side and never listening to both sides of it and making a fair judgment, but always just going with whatever they've come to you with, that can be very dangerous to the project, because your team, especially if they have things that they feel like they're not doing, will often be dishonest with you. Not intentionally necessarily, but just a sort of a watching out for their own reputation with you. And you have to be very careful about it, because the consultants will be trying to be honest with you, but the consultants can't be quite as direct, because again, there's a fine line between being argumentative and trying to be straightforward. And be very cautious about that. Like, really evaluate whether that's a possibility that you did that. Were you cheap and you were looking to save money rather than do what needed to be done? And I've seen clients where for $1,000 customization expense, they added huge complexity to their project and really almost dragged the whole thing down and made it almost a failure, because somebody said, no customization, only out of the box features and functionality within the system. And I've seen that used to the point where it's almost foolish how terrible that has become. Did you go for, when you were allocating budget for the project, did you go for cheap but not necessarily good? In other words, were you trying to select the consulting firm, which maybe was a good consulting firm, but they offered you a deal that was just way below what your competitor or what their competitors were offering, in which case you just under allocated the budget for the project, because that can definitely cause a problem too. If there just isn't enough budget for the consultants to be there enough to make the project work, then that could be a big problem. And that's on the management. Management needs to properly resource a project with budget for the consulting hours that are needed. So as always, check out the links in the description of this video. We try and add other videos and blogs and articles and related topics into the link of the video and in the contents of the description below. And you can also subscribe. We're releasing new videos all the time. But if you want to contact us, we're Sabre Limited. Our website is www.sabrelimited.com. You can reach us by email at sales@sabrelimited.com, or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn at linkedin.com/in/Rob Jolliffe.